while we start. My name is Gerard Oosterwijk. I'm the policy analyst for digital affairs at FEPS, the Foundation for European Progressive Studies. We are the think tank of the progressives in Europe, so connected to the European Parliament and to the Socialists and Democrats in the European Parliament. I'm stepping in, as you can hear, like I work on digital affairs normally. My colleague Kevin Lemaire, he was supposed to be here today. He's the climate policy analyst, but he fell ill. So normally I deal with issues around big tech. Today we're going to discuss big oil. So I'm a bit out of my comfort zone, but of course, like there's a great preparation that I will use for this debate. And my role is to moderate. So maybe to start, I will start a little bit by sharing a bit of setting the scene and sharing a bit of information what we want to discuss today. Then we will go to our panel of very distinguished speakers. And then I hope to also go to the room to ask some questions. So I'm going to ask questions first to the speakers, but then it's also up to you to come in and ask your questions. The title of today is the polluters must pay, from the Niger Delta to oil spills to the EACOP. The EACOP is the East Africa crude oil pipeline being constructed in Uganda, or running from Uganda. But let me start with the Niger Delta. It's a very oil-rich region in southern Nigeria. And there's growing concerns about the negative health and environmental impact of the crude oil spills. This has been going on for a long time, but for example, last year there were 822 oil spills, according to Nigeria's National Oil Spill Detection and Response Agency, so they keep a track of all of this. But we're talking about 28,000 barrels, and for me it's hard to imagine, but the barrel is a big thing. 28,000 barrels of crude oil released in the environment. And if you look at the longer term, since 2006 to 2020, we are talking about 110,000 barrels of oil into the environment. So the region has a lot of rivers, swamps, forests. And there's people living there, of course, and 90% of this actually comes from very big companies. So it's the big oil companies, the 5 big oil companies: Shell, Eni, Chevron, Total, and ExxonMobil. So 90% of these oil spills come from their facilities. And as you can imagine, for the local communities there, they are living off this land. They're living in this land. This has a lot of impact, a lot of environmental impact, but also health impact. So in the Niger Delta, we're talking about 41 years life expectancy, while the average in Nigeria is 55 years. So that's 14 years less of life because of the situation. We're going to connect this to another topic, which is more in Eastern Africa. So the construction of the East African crude oil pipeline project. Total, a big oil company, is working on that, and they will start constructing this in 2024, so next year foreseen. And the idea with this pipeline is to get oil from Uganda's Lake Albert oil fields to the port of Tanga in Tanzania, to then transport it to the rest of the world. Of course, this has a lot of pushback because we are in a climate crisis, so there's a lot of worry about the extra greenhouse emissions that this will create, all this oil that we will export to the market. But the same goes, of course, for the environmental and the health impacts that we see in the Niger Delta. The European Parliament, so that's more close to where I work, and also Diederik works, even in 2022, has a resolution, so there's a majority. So over the political spectrum, there's a majority to call the international community to stop this project from happening. And in this workshop, we will try to connect these two issues. So we have speakers from different parts with a different expertise to really see how do we deal this in the EU-Africa relations or Europe-Africa relationships. How do we deal with this? How do we deal with these big companies doing big projects to the detriment of the local communities, but also to the detriment of climate actions and everything what we try to do. And this Africa Day is actually at a critical moment where there's a lot of regulation that's recently been passed at the European level, but you see also these big projects now starting. So how do we deal with that? That's going to be the discussion. So let me introduce the speakers we have. So we have the Right Honourable Right Reverend Lord Sentamu, Chair of the Bayelsa State Oil and Environmental Commission and the Member of the House of Lords in the UK Parliament. Thank you for being here. We have, yeah, applause. Next to him is Hilda Nakabuye. You're a climate activist from the Fridays for Future Uganda, but probably you did more things, so I'm happy to hear more. But you're a climate activist. And next to her is Diederik Samson. Oh yeah, of course, sorry. Diederik Samson, you're the head of cabinet of the European Commissioner for Climate Action Policy, so really in the heart of the European policy making, also having an overview over the different climate-related legislation. So let me start with the question to Diederik, yeah? Because we are talking about the EU-Africa relations. We're talking about big companies. Europe is very active on regulating. The bigger country, you cannot do it from one member state. So it's on the European level that we deal with these kind of issues. How do you see in general this EU-Africa relation when it comes to climate policy or to the big companies that we are trying to take put to account?
That's a big question. I think the first words, the two words that come to mind, and they're nothing to be proud of if you look at the relationship, it's complicated and hypocrisy. And I'm going to be frank and honest with you about this, because otherwise you never start solving a problem. I remember vividly starting my, let's say, professional life as a Greenpeace activist in the summer of 1995, starting with a campaign that was centered around Kensaro Wiwa, the Nigerian activist, MOSOP founder, a fierce protester against the Shell oil developments in the Niger Delta, murdered by the Nigerian government in November, on the 10th of November 1995. And that was a big thing in the days. And in those days, there was a lot of discussion about the pollution that Shell caused in the Niger Delta. There was a lot of discussion about reparations to be paid, or compensation to be paid, or better behavior from the company. Fast forward more than 20 years from there, almost 30 years from there, hardly anything has changed. And that's something to be aware of, to be mindful of, and to be ashamed of too. If you look at the EACOP, the new pipeline that's now constructed in the Albert Lake oil field towards the port in Tanga, I mean, to be honest, that project is a galaxy different from the project in Nigeria in terms of environmental how you say, environmental consciousness, at least. There's much more effort and also money put into making this a better project. The product, however, is exactly the same. It's oil. It's crude oil. And by the way, it has exactly the same buyers, Europe and China. So we know that we've made some progress if you look at, well, let's say the direct environmental harm that it's causing, although that progress is very limited, and I guess the other speakers will tell much more about it in much more vivid terms. But we haven't mastered the real solution, which is obviously decarbonize our economy, help Africa decarbonize their economy, and thrive a continent with 1.5 billion people, 2.5 billion in 50 years' time, that is just south of our border that we don't seem to care about. So let me end my short introduction with on an optimistic note, which is at the moment, from the quarters that I'm sort of guiding, the Green Deal project in the European Commission, we put an enormous amount of thinking, and more than that, also money and effort into renewable energy developments in Africa. Obviously starting in the north for obvious reasons, but moving all the way to sub-Sahara Africa too. And actually also taking now off in South Africa. That's the projects that we need to look for in the future. So that's also the project that we need to guide companies into in the future, so that we can stop trying to prevent companies from polluting a beautiful continent, and that we can start promoting companies that make a better future for Africa. I sincerely hope that that branch of our work, the renewable energy development, is incredibly more successful in guiding companies in the right direction than we have been so far in the oil world. It's going to take a decade. It's going to take an enormous amount of effort. It's going to take an enormous amount of money. All of that is present. All of that is available. Political will is a renewable source of energy. You can muster it, and we need to muster it in order to prevent the next pipeline from being built after this one. Thank you.
Hilda, can I go to you, because you are one of the founders of the Fridays for Future in Uganda, and we are talking about this new pipeline being made, the East African crude oil pipeline. How does this construction that will start impact the local communities? How do you see things on the ground right now there? What is the situation?
Okay, maybe to start with the show of hands, how many of us have heard about the East African crude oil pipeline? Okay, so for those that do not know, it's the EACOP, East African crude oil pipeline. Oil wells were discovered in western Uganda in a national park called Murchison Falls, which is also close to Lake Albert. And this pipeline will be a 1,443 kilometers long, the world's longest heated crude oil pipeline. It has already displaced over 100,000 people. It has passed through 400 villages, both in Uganda and in Tanzania. It's passing through 200 rivers in these two countries. It's passing through game parks, national parks. A third of this pipeline is passing through Lake Victoria Water Basin, which is a critical biodiversity area. This Lake Victoria is the world's second biggest freshwater body, and it supports over 40 million people's lives. And it's also one of the biggest sources of GDP when you look at Uganda, because it supports agriculture, fishing, tourism, and a lot more. So the pipeline itself is tragic, and it has very grave dangers to the environment, to nature, to the people, and to the climate. As I've said, it's passing through critical biodiversity areas, and it's affecting people because people have lost their land to create space for the pipeline. Some of them have never been compensated, so they are battling with the climate crisis, as well as battling with COVID, which just surfaced, as well as poverty, because they've lost their land. They don't have sources of income, they don't have food, they don't have where to stay. So it's a triple crisis. Of course, it's a problem to the environment, because this project is estimated to emit 34.3 million metric tons of carbon. And this is just the extraction part. So there's the transportations, there's the export, there's the refining and all that. All these emissions during those processes are not catered for. It's just the extraction. So there are even more emissions to be produced. And this ridiculously undermines the efforts of the globe limiting our carbon emissions below 1.5 to stay alive, just like the scientists and the IEA advises. So it's very tragic. Animals have already been affected. Many of them have lost their habitats. Roads have been constructed through the national park to create way for these cars and the transportation of all these construction materials. It's affecting the animals that live in this park because they can't cross from one end to the other. The roads are made of tarmac, so they are hot because of our weather. So they get hot, which prevents reptiles and other crawlers to cross through from one side to the other side. It's affecting their mating systems. It's affecting their movements as animals. And what the people are experiencing is they constructed the central processing facility for this project. So there's a lot of dust, first of all, and there's a lot of noise pollution. So people have started to get diseases, like chronic diseases that they didn't have before, lungs and the asthmas and all these things, which crazy. It had never happened. And a few months back, this area experienced a flood, which had never happened in the history of Hoima. Hoima is the place where the pipeline is going to start. So they experienced a flood, and it's the first time this has happened. It shows how quickly the weather patterns in this area are changing and how they are affecting the people themselves. Of course, it also looks at the soil fertility because the pipeline is going to pass underground. At the moment, the extraction process is ongoing, but it's already affecting the land where the people are staying because of the pollution already. So there are a lot of negative impacts in regards to the economic benefit that our government hopes to achieve from this project.
It's quite shocking to hear all of this, but maybe also to go to you, Lord Sentamu, on the situation in the Niger Delta. I just mentioned like some of the facts of the last year and the last 15 years. Mr. Samson also mentioned, okay, in the start of my career I already was dealing with it. What has changed since? Can you tell us a little bit on that? Because you were also a chair of the Bayelsa State Oil Commission. Can you tell a little bit about the situation there? How are things developing?
First of all, I want to congratulate the first two speakers. Thank you very much for giving us the background. In 2018, the governor of the state of Bayelsa, Henry Dixon, who is now a senator in the National Parliament, invited me to chair what we called the Bayelsa State Oil and Environmental Commission. And we published a report which we launched in the House of Lords on the 16th of May this year. We called our report, we didn't pull any punches, we called it an environmental genocide, counting the human and environmental cost of oil in Bayelsa State. And I've just got, I think, 4 leaflets. Those who are lucky will be able to get one, okay? So I'm going to leave them here. We called it an environmental genocide. The words were clearly chosen. And Bayelsa State is the largest oil producer in Nigeria. That's where it all began in 1950 by Shell and BP. Ajib has now joined, and it produces a lot of oil, and it makes the Nigerian government very rich, and then, like all states, they give a very little amount back, Bayelsa. The pollution, as our moderator has told you, is just extraordinary. I went on a boat trip down the river Niger. It's a very long river, 200 miles of it. We didn't see a single bird around because the water is polluted. I mean, and then the spills happen. And of course, the oil producers say, because of sabotage. Well, there may be a little bit of sabotage, but when you were there, some of these spills had been going on for a very, very long time. Bayelsa is almost the size of Wales. Now, that's not a small place. But the mangroves, wherever there's been a spillage, are dead. The fish, which can be fished, is polluted. And one of the chiefs said, I'm here to give you evidence. I am 50% oil, 50% not oil. Because I was born in a very polluted area. The water was polluted. I've been drinking it ever since. I'm eating the fish, which we can actually fish. All our food is polluted. I'm the most polluted human being on earth. And we had a lot of hearings. Premature births actually happen in that area about 40% more than anywhere else in Nigeria. And the health conditions are just pretty scary. So the spillages, the flares, the burn of the gas creates this unbelievable amount of pollution. And we recommended that they should set up a fund of 12 billion pounds to clean up the area, because remediation is very, very poorly done. It doesn't really work. And then the health to be tackled, education to be tackled. That state ought to be the richest. But you know, a lot of kids are not in school because of poverty. I mean, if you went there, the poverty is just shocking against the background of all of this oil. There is lack of care, lack of responsibility, and when the money is created, which should have actually helped the people, Salawiwa, the person who was murdered by the Nigerian state, and the family and others were compensated by $19 million. A case was brought up in America. Salawiwa said, the trouble we've got in Nigeria is not corruption. It is theft on an unprecedented scale. And it is in our report. The same is going to happen to Uganda, by the way. The oil will be produced, but don't tell me all the money will go to the people of Uganda. Theft on an unprecedented scale is already happening and will continue to happen. I've spoken too much, better shut up.
Yeah. I think it's... Hilda, can I ask you, like, you painted a picture of what's happening right now, and this is already going on for decades, but this is coming to your country. What is standing in the way of this climate action that you're pushing? Like, what do you think could be done about all of this, or how do you see that? You're trying to organize. Are there anything that we can do, or what do you think that?
Well, we've tried to mobilize both the grassroots communities and the global community. We have what they call a successful campaign, which is the Stop EACOP campaign. Mm-hmm. But we still need a lot more to be done. For example, recently the project just got money from China state-owned bank, which money they've been looking for quite a while, but because of our activism, we have been able to withdraw 27 banks from the project because of our actions. But now China has provided 40% of the funds that is needed to run the project, and this puts a lot of our work at risk. First of all, there's a lot of security problems for the activists that are working on ground because of Uganda as a country has a very repressed civic space. So all the human rights defenders and activists working on this project are targeted, and they are followed, they are threatened, and all arrested. A lot is happening. We know that this project will not get the economic development that our country or our president wants to get, because just like all the other resources that Uganda had, the cobalt, the copper, that were mined even before I was born, I found the country in the same state, and this didn't get us anywhere. So basically, the oil won't as well. But what we were using are two ways: targeting the banks, which bring in the financial support, and the insurance companies that offer insurance for the project. So for a project to be successful, it needs two of those. So we targeted the banks and the insurance. Now they have the money, part of the money. So now we are looking at insurance and how to stop that hand. Hopefully, if we stop insurance, then the project won't be successful. But there's still a lot more to be done. We need global solidarity. We need more people to be aware of the project so that they can join us in the fight. As we are fighting on the front lines, we are putting our lives at risk. We need the global community to support us more and more fast to put pressure on these companies because they are global north companies like Total. If pressure is built in Total and actions are done in, for example, Netherlands where the company is registered, or France where the Total is a French company, and if we can mobilize thousands of people to do actions every day or at a given time, then we can be able to stop the pipeline. As we also do actions in Uganda, this can help build, massive change. But we also look at our governments, especially the governments in Netherlands and in France, where Total as a company comes from. What policies are in place to stop their actions, to stop the projects that they are doing in countries like mine. The IEA said we shouldn't have any new oil or gas projects if we want to limit global warming. So why aren't they following this advice? The EU Parliament, for example, put out a paper advising Total and the Ugandan government to stop the construction of the pipeline and make sure that human rights are not violated, but they didn't take the advice. So what more actions should we do? We've been on the streets, we've been in media, we've done a lot of emails, sending out messages, we've been arrested a couple of times, people have been killed, activists have been threatened, and we don't know what else to do apart from doing that, but we need a lot of global solidarity to push these companies out of our countries and to stop the work that they are doing, not only with the East African Crude Oil Pipeline project, but also other projects they are opening up everywhere in other countries.
Maybe I can bring this back to Diederik, because a lot of us mentioned about European companies, also even registered here in the Netherlands. How do you see this at the European Commission? How are you dealing with this? Because I know that there was also some legislation on corporate social due diligence, so making countries responsible or companies responsible for what they do outside of Europe. Is there a vision? Because this is like it's like we are talking about the social situation, the environmental impact, but it's opposite of what we need to do. Like you said in your introduction, if we are serious about our climate action and our Green Deal. So is there something that we can do on a European scale or even on member state scale? Is there?
Well, there's a lot you can do. Not all of that very effective. So let me give you a few examples. The due diligence regulation that we put out is pretty good at making companies behave in doing the thing they want to do more proper. But it's not going to prevent those companies of doing what they want to do. So drilling for oil and transporting it over 1,400 kilometers and for God's sake, heating that pipeline, that's what they want to do. And the due diligence, the regulation just tells them to do it as proper as they can, which is obviously better than doing, let's say, the old ways that we did it from the 1950s, for instance, in Nigeria, but it's not good enough. The other thing that you can do is be the European Parliament and tell Uganda that they shouldn't develop oil. Well, you were there, I guess. The Uganda government didn't know how quickly they wanted to use the word colonialism as a response to that resolution. And I don't blame the European Parliament. They mean well, and they did well, but it's not very effective. From Europe, as the buyer of that oil, as the providers of the birthplace of the companies that develop that oil, and then tell Uganda and other sub-Sahara African countries that they can't develop oil while we got rich over it. It's a bit of a complicated message. Nevertheless, you can still do it, but brace yourself for the backlash, and there it was. So what can we do? I learned from my experience also within Greenpeace, fighting oil projects, fighting nuclear power, fighting all kinds of polluting, of all kinds of ways to destroy the planet. You cannot stop oil by stopping oil. You can stop it by providing the alternative, which is cheaper, more abundant, better available, more democratic, has all the advantages that people are actually looking for. And for a long time, those alternatives were not available at all. Now they are. Solar and also wind and also other forms of renewable energy are at the moment bigger, cheaper, more democratic and better available than oil. So what the hell are we waiting for? And this is what I would urge the European Parliament and myself, by the way, looking into the mirror, the European Commission and other countries and companies in Europe to seriously step on that different pathway towards a better future than continuing the pathway towards destruction of the planet. Only 5 years ago, I wouldn't have imagined to be able to say solar energy is cheaper than oil. At the moment, it's a fact. It's a fact. The only thing we need to do is muster the will, the power and the money to get to countries like Uganda, etc. And the best example of why it can be done, this little country, the Netherlands, with its cloudy weather, has more solar panels than the whole of Africa. There's more solar panels sitting on roofs and bare land in the Netherlands than in the whole of Africa. So what are we waiting for?
I think it's potential because there's a dynamic, of course, with the big interest, the financial interest that were mentioned as well, the theft, but also the big companies coming from Europe. And so we need to break a little bit the system. Lord Sentamu, before we go to the audience, I want to ask you a final question as well, because we're talking about the EU, the European level. You're, of course, in the UK. You did this report. How do you see, do you have any ideas on like how we can use this have a positive view on the EU or Europe, so let's include also the UK, the European countries on a country level relation with Africa and how we can support a different way of climate, the fight against climate injustice, the fight against these horrible situations from developing. Is there a way, like also you are in Westminster, how do we deal this? How we deal with this?
The United Kingdom may have left the European Union, but we never left Europe.
Yes.
We never left Europe. So the ties are so deep. So AGIP, for example, which is a company in Europe, ought to put more pressure like we are trying to do with Shell in the United Kingdom. In fact, at the moment, we've got 2 cases in the Supreme Court. If they go the way we hope it will, a lot of those people who should have been compensated in Bielsa State will get compensated. And therefore, it will be a chain down the way. So I actually think that AGIP and there's another company from in Italy, and in fact,
Any maybe?
NES, and also on our commission, he was an advisor, the former European president. So one of the, so there is a sense in which our history should galvanize us, and I find it shocking. More solar panels in the Netherlands than the whole of Africa, and Africa has got more sun than the Netherlands. I mean, look, we're in Amsterdam. Look up today. There is too much rain already, isn't it? But, so I actually think that, sir, you ought to be the greatest advocate that Africa should not, or the rest of the continent, should not look towards oil, which is a great polluting dark thing. It doesn't really. And although you think a time is going to come, actually, when that long pipe and its oil, nobody's going to buy it because of environmental concerns. So your campaign is absolutely critical. And I'm very glad you were very brave, no matter how many times they've arrested you or roughed you up, you've not stopped. And as far as I'm concerned, I think I'm going to begin to lend my voice to your thing. So together, in Europe, we ought to be supporting solar energy, and that actually will kibosh the entire thing of this long pipe that's going somewhere. And then the other thing I'm not so sure about is whether it will have the returns Uganda expects. Borrow 40% of your money from China, you brought them home, and they will not leave you alone. They are looking for resources, and that could be in the future bought at a very, very cheap price in order to pay for the interest rates of their loan. So you may actually discover that the whole thing is going nowhere. So
Hilda, you want to react maybe on all of this with like how do you see this, like the influence of China? Is it already, do you feel it? Because I understand that you had a successful campaign from stopping certain banks, but then China doesn't care about ethics. How do you already feel it that they are there to stay, or there's a connection to that? It's a geopolitical game as well, in the end. This
that is a tough question because China has a lot of investments in Uganda. So I think in many other African countries, they come as investors and then they never leave. Most of our wetlands, over 70%, are taken over by Chinese farms and companies, and they have been very, very devastated, and the government doesn't do a thing about it. So I'm not surprised if he says they will never leave because they've devastated our wetlands, but they move on to another and another and another. So to me, these are the patterns that we want to fight, that we are fighting. But the Chinese are very, very complicated people, because however much you go to the streets, however much you go to their companies, however much you go to their offices, they never respond, they never write back, they never come to meetings, they never do anything. So they're very, very complicated people to know and to reach out to. So, which makes actions really hard. Yeah.
I promised also to go to the room, so I don't know who has a question. There's somebody also with the mic, I think. So can I? Yeah, I see a hand there in the middle. 2 hands actually, 3 now. So it's all there. Can we take several questions, like 2 or 3 maybe there, and then and maybe also make clear if you have a specific question to a specific person of the speakers.
That is even better. My name is Jacob Baraza, and out of curiosity, I don't know how much we are looking at this issue from a systems perspective. For example, a very good example has been given about the solar, but also what about the users of the so-called crude oil? Are we also targeting the cars? Are we also looking at who is supposed to be the market? And how can we then target that as a driver towards inhibiting the production of the same? Thanks.
So the users, how we're going to deal with that? You also had a question there? Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much to be here, and this was wonderful and inspiring to listen to, although also sometimes a little bit depressing. The question is about the green energy transition, and perhaps to Samson, I suppose. We rarely ever hear that for this green energy transition and all the solar that we're now using and wind, also a lot of resources are going to be used in Africa. So the mining will also come at its own cost. How are the discussions there, and why don't we hear much about that at the European level?
Yeah. So there was a third one there in the middle, I think, if you still want to ask it. And then we go to the answers, and if there's more time, we do a second round.
I wanted to ask Hilda what she thinks is the potential in Uganda for large-scale solar panel projects.
So the last one was really to Hilda. Maybe we start with that one. Do you see it? Because also Diederik also mentioned like there's not that many solar panels yet in Africa. Is this part of the discussion? Because that's in Europe very much of the discussion. Of course, we're in a oil In the fossil fuel industry, the fossil fuel economy, we need to go to renewables. How is that in Africa? And in Uganda specifically?
This is a growing discussion because when we do our activism in these grassroots communities, they ask us, if not oil, then what? They ask us for alternatives always, and we give solar panels as one of the alternatives. And it's a very growing thing. Many communities, especially those that haven't been compensated, can't even pay for electricity, so they end up buying the solar panels. We have them. Uganda has very big potential. I think Africa as a continent has very big potential in solar energy since we receive sunlight throughout the year. We have potential that can even power up the whole world, But these are some of the investment gaps that we are seeing. If investment is put into, for example, solar energy in these countries, then it can help the country and the continent to develop sustainably, which is what we are looking at, a just transition. So there is a lot of potential. There are also other sectors where investment would mean a lot. For example, tourism in a country like mine, fisheries, agriculture, all these are potential sectors to invest in that can help the communities grow sustainably. But solar is a very good investment to make if the EU is looking at some of these sectors to invest. Yeah.
And Diederik, you really made the case for solar, and solar also needs resources, also rare materials. How do you see this relationship? Because it was a good question, I think. How do we make that in itself also sustainable? Because it's also a real challenge.
The need for critical raw materials is abundant, not only in solar and wind, but especially in batteries and electrolyzers, the technology that you also need in order to power a society with renewable energy. And you don't hear much about it because it's a bit of a new kid in town. The Critical Raw Materials Act we just published it half a year ago, but it's the start of a trajectory towards not making the same mistake again. And that mistake is obviously becoming very dependent from one supplier for your most precious source of wealth, which is energy. And we had this with Russia, sleepwalking ourselves as Europe into over-dependency for our most precious resource from one supplier, an adversary, an enemy actually. So we need to prevent that mistake. We have 3 solutions for that. One is recycling, 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 and actually there's no physical law that prevents you from using those materials endlessly. But you need to set up a system in which you can recycle it. But as we will use more and more of it, even 100% recycling will not do the trick. So mining is the other one, and then I mean mining at home. So not outsourcing your mining to Africa, like we did, as a mistake in the past, but mining at home. Those critical raw materials, rare earth they're actually not that rare, but you need to look for them. And they're somewhat deep into the ground. Obviously, Europe is not a very suitable place because it's very populated, but nothing prevents us from sacrificing a little in order to get more back. And the third one is the most important one, it's innovation. Innovation. You always have those extrapolating ideas, if we continue doing this forever, we will just get, we will not make it. There was once a guy who predicted that London would drown in 2 meters of horse shit if the amount of carriages with horses in front of them would double and double and double again and again, like they did in the beginning of 2 centuries ago. And then we invented the car, the metro, the bicycle, and nothing of that happened. Innovation can bring you endless new prosperity. Solar panels can be made of perovskite, which is a natural material. You can also make it artificially. It doesn't require rare earth critical raw materials. Same goes for batteries. You can make them out of steel, at least theoretically. And now we need the brains and the people to muster that power and innovate ourselves into a new sustainable future. So recycling, recycling, recycling. Yes, mining at home. It's a difficult message to tell to the public, but it needs to happen. And innovation. And that will prevent us from making the same mistake again.
So we have one more question to answer, and then I see already you. So, or you want to react straight on this? Because we can do that because we have the user question still that is open. But you can speak out or the mic.
Yeah.
I think
it's very interesting that you mentioned innovation because I don't really think.
Or maybe wait for the mic because also for the recording, perhaps.
Thank you. Yeah. No, I think it's very interesting that you mentioned innovation as the most important thing of this crisis, because I would say, how can we innovate ourselves out of a crisis that is based on consumption? So, because I thought maybe as a third aspect, you would say degrowth, because isn't the whole problem that we are consuming too much and that we should consume less? So why would degrowth not be a way out of this crisis instead of innovating and still consuming the same thing as we are doing always? Because that's the whole problem.
I'm happy to dive deep into the rabbit hole of a discussion on degrowth, but I'm very hesitant to do that on the Africa Day. This is a continent of 1.5 billion people. It will be 2.5 billion in 50 years' time. Most of those people are already born, and they will become 4 times as rich as they are now because they have the right for development. If we talk degrowth, we can do that in our little luxury spot of the Netherlands. Indeed, in the Netherlands, you could have a sincere discussion about should we aim to become more rich than we are right now? But Africa, that's a different ballgame. So we will need,
before we even
if we stop growing completely, there is a whole continent that has the right to develop itself, to get richer, yes, because that makes their lives so much better. We need to have those resources available. So yes, a discussion on degrowth is great, but it will not solve our problem.
So maybe this opens up a new discussion, which I want to continue. But first, there was the first question also about the user perspective. Lord Sentamu, like, how do you see this? Also, UK is also, of course, like a very rich and also still in the usage of fossil fuels. How do you see this? Like, what can we do on the user side to stop this development?
Well, I am one of those who is absolutely committed that there should be no more exploration of oil. Because it pollutes the environment. No matter how safe you think you can do, what Nigeria, particularly Bielsa, has taught us, that liquid may be safe for 10 years, but then the pipe somewhere will give leaks. You've heard these leaks going in the United States. A big tanker begins to leak and actually pollutes the thing. But because it's United States, they have the authority and the power to say the polluter pays. So you, Enron, clean up. But they've caused a lot of damage already. They may clean it up, but what about those, just like I am one who is opposed to nuclear weapons. And the reason why I'm campaigning for it, because it could just destroy quite a lot of people. For what purpose? So the user question, sir, you are right. So it's not only about all that you talk about, but like the European gentleman said, we now got electric cars. People didn't think this was possible. Now, if the price of electric cars fall to such a level, the use of oil in terms of cars may actually not be all that much anymore. And, and if we put enough places where the cars can be charged, I mean, I've got neighbors who got electric cars. I've got a hybrid, which really 70%, because I don't go all over the place, 70% uses a battery, and that's guaranteed for 30 years. And I'm seeing more and more hybrids. So the user could be persuaded. Seat belts in England was a problem. It became a law, and everybody now wears a seat belt. And by the way, now I'm not against smoke. I'm not against people who smoke. But in England, in the public places, aeroplanes, trains, whatever it is, pubs, everything, you are not allowed to smoke. And smoke has dropped to a huge level. So it is possible. That's why the campaigners like her are trying to say this is not because we don't want this. It's just that actually we have a climate crisis and we are adding to its problem by the things we do. For example, driving big guzzling cars of oil. They're polluting, adding to the difficulty. So I will go for yourself, sir. If European Union, including United Kingdom, is capable of guaranteeing cheaper solar panels with people to install them, I think you're going to get a much higher buy-up. And the other thing I'd say, Uganda's electricity comes out of water. It's a dam that has a lot of water that produces Uganda's electricity. By the way, have they put another one in Murchison Falls? They're planning. Uganda supplies electricity to Kenya, Tanzania. And if they did that instead of your pipe, Uganda will be a very rich country as it sells its oil, its electricity, which simply comes out of a huge fall and huge turbines turning. And that has been there for a long time. So Uganda put on solar panels and another dam. It actually, in terms of industry running, will not need much. And you are quite right about being a consumer. Consumer society need to cut back on their consumption. We have enough food in the world to feed everybody. But we do not have enough food to fill people's greed. We don't.
Hilda, yeah, this is an applause. Huh? I hear the applause, and we can also. Hilda, can I come also back to you, because there's also connection, like Diederik Samson was telling about, like the right for Africa to develop. How can we get to a better development, like not to do indeed like the fossil fuel phase that the rest of the world, but how do you see all of this? Because like it is was mentioned about the dam you are providing for yourself. Do you see a paradox, or is there like a way to get this right and to not stop Africa from developing, but developing in a good way, with this whole degrowth discussion on the back? Do you agree? Is it really like, is it a problem, or how do you see that as a young African?
Well, I think it starts with understanding what development is, what Africa as a continent sees as development, or what the global north sees as development or defines as development. I and the community I represent define development as the right to have food. You know, there's food at the table. I can afford education. I can afford a fair life. I can get health care service, not what the society or the global north defines as development. So understanding what development is to the public or the community that you are trying to think for means a lot. And in that case, if we are looking at education, healthcare, food security, then these things are available. We have the resources and all the systems to put them in place. So what is delaying us, or what is refusing? I think we need to think outside the box in how we want to see things moving forward. When you say Africa doesn't have to use its resources or extract oil, someone might see it in a way that you are stopping Africa from developing. But then Africa doesn't need the oil to develop. We have a lot of other resources that can be extracted sustainably. For example, we have a lot of other, for example, what we call development skills, our ancestral knowledge, our diverse culture, tourism, our landscapes. All this can help us to pay for education, to pay for healthcare, and what we need as a continent. I think that is what we should prioritize. Yeah.
So really to find your own, find your own way and not to perceive in a way like from the north. I think also like we run slowly out of time. I think it's also a good final remark, unless somebody wants to add some final thoughts. You are allowed. You want to say some final thoughts, maybe?
My final thought is, as a child growing up in Uganda, we had everything we needed, 11 acres of land, and we grew our food. And when our neighbors' crops had failed, we would share them what we've got. So I was raised in a family, 13 children, 2 parents. We had a full football team and a reserve. So we could play the game of caring. And what really burdens me more than anything else, Uganda had everything. Amin started destroying it. And I don't think it ever recovered. And it will take a time. And the things you talk about are the things that actually matter in terms of development. And solar panels. My mother-in-law and the whole family, they live in the east of Uganda. There is no way of getting electricity there because they've never taken actually the cables there to be able to get electricity. You know, 500 pounds. We put up solar panels on 3 houses. They now got electricity at night. They can also cook their food.
Like magic.
Like magic. So it's not all that costly. And please, could we, all of us, help in this question of the polluter pays? That campaign is important. Consumerism, I'm afraid, consumes all of us in the end.
Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you also, Diederik Samson. Oh yeah, of course. Sorry.
Okay, so I just wanted to mention one quote. You talked about it, how society used to share, so that's empathy. And I want to emphasize that change will happen at the speed of empathy.
So thank you all. Thank you for being here, Lord Sentamu, Hilda, Flavia Nakabuye, and Diederik Samson for being here and having this very interesting debate about how these 2 different parts of Africa, how they're dealing with the same difficulties, and how also the European Union and European countries and European companies should be held to account to what's happening, and also what we can do. I was really inspired by all the thoughts, and I will take a lot of it back to my work on a different topic. But I think it's a cause we have to fight for. Us as FEPS, we work a lot on the just transition. So that's about like we're going through this climate crisis, and how do we get that in a social way here within Europe, but also on a global scale, because in the end the climate crisis is affecting all of us. We need global solutions, so we will take back also your thoughts and your input for this work there, and I hope we will find a way to do it better and not stick, unless maybe the opening of Diederik, what you said about like 30 years, not much has changed. Let's hope that in the next 10 years or even 15 years, a lot will change. And I think it's all up to all of us to contribute to that. So thank you very much. Thank you for the speakers, and thank you also for the audience and the questions. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Thank you all, Diederik.